Officially, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great honor to be involved with the World Food Safety Day celebrations. World Food Safety Day takes place on the 7th of June, which is on Sunday, but it's not really possible for all of us to have a good time together on Sunday, what with us hopefully enjoying a weekend. And so with the help of the Department of Health, we decided to rather put together a whole week of celebrations in order to ensure that we make a proper celebration of this year's World Food Safety Day. I think you can agree that our minds have been very, very focused on the pandemic at hand. And it feels good to be able to talk about something other than coronavirus, even if it is just for a couple of hours. As we're all consumers, I think we all appreciate the fact that we have a right to safe and nutritious food. But although we have food safety controls in place, the WHO tells us that almost 1 in 10 people in the world fall ill after eating contaminated food. And this has a devastating effect on livelihoods. It has an impact on children being unable to learn and adults being unable to work. Although we have a very strong regulatory framework, it's not just the regulatory aspects that make sure that our food is safe. And we rely on public-private partnerships in order to do that. And really that's what today is all about, because I'm going to be discussing a number of public-private partnerships and how these work to keep you and I safe as South Africans. Where does World Food Safety Day come from? Well, on the 20th of December 2018, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution proclaiming a World Food Safety Day. And this is only the second time ever that we've actually had this day celebrated. And in terms of this year's World Food Safety Day, the theme is Food Safety, Everyone's Business. And the WHO has put out 5 calls to action in order to help us to understand what this actually means. And yesterday, we were fortunate enough to work with the Department of Health and the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications, and we discussed the first call to action, which is ensuring it's safe. The second call to action is growing it safe. And this has really got to do with agriculture and food producers adopting good practices. And that's really the focus of what we're going to be talking about today. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our speakers. As you can see, I have a whole panel of them today, and a good number of them are vets. And so we're going to be talking a lot about animal health. And then we have a very, very special guest all the way from Melbourne in Australia. That's it. And he has stayed up very late in order to chat to us about produce safety. And so we're going to be talking all things green with Deon Mahoney a little bit later in this presentation. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Our first presentation is by Dr. Mphane Molefe, and it's really great to be able to bridge the first call to action, which is government's role, and the second call to action, which is agriculture's role, by using this presentation. And so, Dr. Molefe, I really want to thank you so much for making yourself available to us this afternoon. It's really great that we have somebody from the Department of Agriculture who can assist us with this presentation. And it's so important to discuss veterinary public health, because I think we're all still, enjoying our steaks, but we need to make sure, obviously, that these are safe. And so over to you, Dr. Molefe. We would very much like to understand, how does the veterinary public health service ensure that food is safe for South Africans?
Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson. So, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Mphane Molefe, and I am the Director responsible for veterinary public health in the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. And most of you may know it with a previous name that we call DAF, and now it's a name with a very long acronym, DALRRD. My presentation, I'm just going to try my best to stick within the 15 minutes allocated time. So I may skip a number of slides because I have a detailed presentation. But I'm just going to go through what our role is as veterinary services, in food safety. And I'm firstly with the historical background on what our role used to be in veterinary services. Way back, our role was mainly on control of major diseases, episodic diseases. So we were limited to just looking at on the animal health side. But over time, the scope has increased to include not only diseases, but also efficient production thereof to ensure that we follow the whole food chain. So over the years, the mandate has expanded. As you can see at the bottom, we are now working on a concept of farm to fork, whereby the role of veterinary services has gone beyond just primary animal health, but includes the whole food chain up to secondary production, but also at retail. We play some role at retail and also a big role in import and exports of animals and meat and all the other products. Just to look at the legislative mandate that we have in agriculture, we have several acts and regulations that govern the whole chain. Starting with at primary production is the Animal Diseases Act, Act 35 of 1984, which has a primary role to regulate on-farm disease control and the health of animals. And then after that, then you go to the next step, which is the products thereof, and the Meat Safety Act then kicks in to regulate the slaughter of the animals and for human and animal consumption. I must emphasize our role also extends to slaughter for animal consumption to ensure that only healthy animals are slaughtered, and also to regulate the importation and exportation of meat and meat products. But then in order to do that, there's a very important act that then ensures that there's traceability of the products, and we call it the Animal Identification Act. It ensures that every animal is identifiable at a farm level, and therefore you are able then to trace the product back to the farm of origin. And we are in a process to amend this piece of legislation to be able to identify individual animals, but that is a subject for another. The next legislation, which is very important, and previously we had not been giving serious attention to this, which is the Animals Protection Act. But this act has a mandate to ensure that animals are treated humanely. So the Animals Protection Act, its role is the prevention of cruelty to animals. So currently the emphasis is on producing meat that is safe, but animals thereof were treated in a humane way. And this is also an important role when it comes to export facilitation, where importing countries also require certification to ensure that the animals were treated in a humane way. So this is also an important piece of legislation. And then we also have the Agricultural Product Standard Act, which has a role to regulate the marketing, but also the quality of certain agricultural products. And then lastly, we have the Fertilizers, Farm Feed, Agricultural Remedies, and Stock Remedies Act. This long name, we just call it Act 36, for ease of reference. But then this is the act that then controls the inputs that go into primary production, which is fertilizers, farm feeds, agric remedies, and stock remedies, but also sterilizing plants that then handle waste or byproducts from abattoirs to make them into other products like pet food. Yes, then I just want to show here quickly the overview of meat safety in a country to show from primary production when the animal is alive all the way until it gets to retail. So this is basically a short representation of the farm to fork concept, which then shows which regulatory activities responsible for what. You can see that agriculture and veterinary services plays a role at animal health, welfare, at primary production level under the Animal Diseases Act, Animals Protection Act, Animal Identification, and Act 36. So these acts are the ones that we use at primary production. And then at secondary production at abattoir level, we also play a role because under the Meat Safety Act, we then regulate the slaughter of animals under the Meat Safety Act, but also the Department of Health has a role at that point under Foodstuff, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. So there's a bit of an overlap, but we are able to then be able to know whose mandate, is what, and we're able to work in harmony, within the two departments to ensure that there's food safety at the end of the day. And then we play some minimal role at retail level, especially to ensure that it's mainly a law enforcement role where we ensure that the meat that we find at butcheries or at restaurants and shops was sourced from an abattoir. So our role is not necessarily to enforce our laws at retail, but to make sure that the meat that is being consumed at that level or being sold at that level complies with the provisions of the Meat Safety Act. And then finally, you have the acts, three acts that then cover the whole scope. The Stock Theft Act is very important in this whole chain, and NEMA, our National Environmental Management Act, also is very critical. And then there's a Consumer Protection Act, which then covers every aspect of the work that you do here. Thanks. Let's go to primary production and see what our role is. We are focused on detection, surveillance, prevention, treatment, and control of animal diseases to ensure that the animals are safe, but also looking at conditions of public health to, at the end of the day, safeguard public health. So we're not only safeguarding animal health, but we're also safeguarding public health by what we do at primary production. So we provide animal producers with information and advice on how to avoid, eliminate, and control food safety hazards. We run a residue monitoring and control program where we then take samples and check that the animals that end up being slaughtered do not have any residues that can harm human beings. And we also ensuring the responsible and prudent use of biological products, which especially antibiotics, because that is a critical aspect that we're trying to make sure that we don't end up with antimicrobial resistance. So that is our role, but there's also the role that I clarified earlier on to ensure that the animals are slaughtered humanely. Now, going to secondary production, that is at the abattoir level and processing plants. Our role at that level is to ensure that production facilities comply with prescribed food legislation, food safety legislation, but also to conduct inspections on live animals that have been brought from the farm. And we do ante-mortem inspection before an animal is slaughtered to be sure that the animal is then safe to be slaughtered. And thereafter, we then do primary and secondary meat inspection. And only meat that is safe and fit for human consumption will then be passed by our meat inspectors. And we also then make sure that these animals are treated humanely at the end of the day. We also have other roles that we play, as I mentioned earlier, under the Meat Safety Act and also under the Animal Diseases Act. We do a lot of import facilitation. All the meat that comes into South Africa, that is imported into South Africa, has to be cleared by veterinary services at our ports of entry. And so we ensure that the meat that comes in complies with our food safety legislation through a veterinary health certification that would have been issued by the veterinarian on the other side, and then we check it and see whether that gives us all the attestations that we need. And if not, that meat will be rejected, or it may be treated in a different way, but it won't be sent through into commerce if we have doubts and if it doesn't comply with the South African food safety legislation. But we also then play a role in export facilitation, where we do, the opposite. When we are exporting meat and animal products, we then issue veterinary health certificates that then ensure and attest that the exported product or products meet both animal health and food safety requirements, so that the importing country will then be able to have satisfaction that the meat or the meat products are safe for human consumption. But we also then work in collaboration with other departments like Department of Health, NRCS, the DTI, and Consumer Commission in investigating foodborne illnesses. We then also set standards for laboratories involved in disease diagnostics. And finally, we also then raising awareness. So we do a lot of extension work with primary producers, with consumers, to ensure that the animals are treated properly and their food is safe for human consumption. Thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Molefe. I had absolutely no idea there was quite so much legislation that has to do with anything that has got more than 2 legs. It is a very, very complicated area of food safety legislation within our country. So thank you very much for explaining it the way that you did so that we can understand it. How are you enjoying your new name as a department?
It's difficult. It's long. We don't know whether to call it DALRRD or DALRRD or DALRRD, whatever. We're still trying to figure out what to call it, but we'll get there.
You will get there. You will get there. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your presentation, and we'll say goodbye for now and we'll chat a little bit later. Thank you so much. Animal health is such a critical component of ensuring that that steak on your plate is safe for your consumption. Dr. Vervoort, over to you.
Thanks very much, Linda. Just to introduce myself, I'm Pieter Vervoort. I'm the Managing Director of the Animal Health Forum. Animal Health Forum was founded in 2006, where we tried to look at communication issues there were between government and private enterprise, and to see how we could solve those issues to the betterment of both parties. So that's really what we do. If we look at the first slide, we can see that I'd like to talk a little bit about food safety in the animal production sector. And I think it's very important because of the possibility of zoonosis or contamination deriving from animals or their products. And I think this is quite important. We've seen a number of issues, and Dr. Molefe mentioned the listeriosis, and there are a number of zoonoses that we can get from animals as well. But the risk is very low if we can address the elimination of these risks from the source to the consumer. And I think the important thing here is that we have proper identification of the animals, of the products, right up to the consumer. We have correct practices all along the value chain, and we have complete traceability. We should, of course, produce food that is safe for consumers, but increasingly it is becoming important that we also make sure that the correct and sufficient quantity of food gets to the consumer. And that is really where government talks about not only food safety, but also food security. Okay, so what is the function of the Animal Health Forum? I really discussed that earlier, and it's really as a conduit to establish communication between various levels of government, which includes central government, provincial government, and of course local government, and then the private industries. And we do this through communication. We are trying to identify gaps that are around, especially in the veterinary field, where veterinary services is a provincial, it has to be done by the provinces according to the constitution, but we still have central veterinary services as well. And sometimes those communications are very difficult. And we try and help establish capacity where it's lacking and assist there. And then, of course, we try and see that there is cooperation all the way through the production chain, from the primary producer, farmer on the ground, to the consumer. And really, this is a slide I took from one of the discussions and I had with farmers a while ago, and the whole system is based on trust. And trust is really, a definition of trust is a system we believe in without questioning. And I think that is becoming more and more difficult in the world today as we are distancing ourselves from each other in this world. And very few people have relatives on farms and so on anymore, and they don't really know what's going on with farms and is happening on the farms anymore. So really, it's important that primary producers realize they have to build and ensure that they have systems in place that are built on trust. And these are systems of traceability and so on in place. And they help the consumer trust that what is going on the farm is correct. They also make sure that there are food safety systems in place. And the important thing is, and I think this is something that we've seen worldwide now, we do have food safety scares, be it in meat, be it in lettuce, be it in melons. And it's really that the consumer wants to know that if something goes wrong, it will be attended to immediately, correctly, and the problem will be sorted out. And I think this is really the trust system that we need to re-establish. I was looking for a talk I gave on traceability a while ago, and there was a nice definition that it says in a supply chain, traceability may be both a regulatory and ethical or environmental issue. And I think this is really where we are. A lot of the ways in which we have worked in the past is to make sure that things are legal. But more and more we are moving towards ethical behavior on farms, and not only ethically in the way we treat animals, but the way we treat each other and the way we treat the environment as well. So what projects are we working on? The one thing we've been working on for about 5 years now with DAF and with all the organizations, the production organizations, is a proper individual animal identification and traceability system, something that Dr. Mphane mentioned as well. We're also trying to look at harmonizing residue and antibiotic resistance monitoring, the AMR. And this is really becoming quite important, especially for local consumers, but also if you want to trade internationally. With that, we have helped to establish with the NRF and the University of Pretoria a risk analysis COP, which is really getting off the ground now, and we hope that it will deliver what we're expecting it to deliver over the next few years. Of course, we also look with the production industries at animal disease control measures. As new technology becomes available, we need to understand what technology we would like to use and how we can use this technology for control of animal diseases compared to not 50 years ago, but even 10 or 2 years ago. And then we are looking at risk mitigation and compensation for farmers, how they can mitigate their risks and make sure that not only do they produce safe food, but through the health of the animals also produce sufficient quantities of food. So in summary, I put this to some farmers the other day and said, do consumers trust farmers? And when you read the lay press, there's a lot of distrust. And I think it's sad because I think most of our farmers, and when I say most, probably 99% of them really look after the animals, really try and do the best they can. But this does not always come across to the consumer. Also, it's important that when we talk about consumers, we talk about our international consumers, the buyers of our products. And do they trust us? And do we have a system in place that we can trust the certificates that get given and that they are safe? The question there as well is, do we trust each other? And I think that's very important, that government trusts private enterprise trusts government, and there's trust all along the value chain. I asked the question as well whether we were controlling diseases as well as we should have as a country or a society, and I think we could do better than that. And then the question really was, will a traceability solve all our problems? And the answer that we came out there, well, it won't solve all the problems, but it's going to solve a lot of the problems. And the quote on the left there is quite a nice quote. I may have trust issues, but some people seem to have an issue with the responsibility of being trusted. And that's where we need to be. We need to be in this position where we as farmers, where we as value chain are trusted by the consumer.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think the way that you put it is very, very profound, because there is so much of food safety which relies totally on trust.
We should definitely be able to control these diseases. Of course, with the COVID now, everybody's panicked again because this now came from meat. But I think that is meat that's definitely not being checked, and also a very rare occurrence that something like this does happen.
Absolutely, and I think it again moves to what you said regarding the need for proper food safety systems, which we do have. We do have the legal framework, as Dr. Molefe highlighted, and it's really encouraging to hear that there's so much work that's been devoted to the traceability systems within our country, because I suppose ultimately this photograph really explains why the National Animal Health Forum exists.
Yes, it does. You get to a stage in life where you say, but you've done what you need to do, but what are you going to leave behind? Are you going to leave a better system behind than the one you inherited? And I think if you can do that, by the time you put your head down for the last time, I think you've actually achieved more than most people have.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Vervoort. I'm now going to hand over to the next veterinarian, and this is Dr. Neethling. And so Dr. Neethling is going to tell us a little bit about what happens when we take the cow and we make sure that it lands up as a carcass. So Dr. Neethling, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to share a couple of words and more perhaps on the integration between the producer and then going to the abattoir, if I may. And I know it's actually part of our discussion on Friday, but safe meat production is really an integrated approach. It deals with all levels of our red meat production chain, and also with government. So I think, we all need to work together to make it work. There's not one golden bullet in this case. So what I want to share with you, I think here is the principle really that if we talk about microbiological status of our meat, the safety of our product, then we need to keep in mind that there are three very important aspects. It's the microbiological status of the animal that we receive. Then, how successful are we at the abattoir in converting that animal to meat? And then all the temperature, time, and other conditions of storage and distribution. And as you well know, it's in the last case where the problems here with temperatures and the handling is actually the problems are happening with our consumers still that lead to food safety issues. But if we deal with the microbiological status of the animal at slaughter, I think we often tend to think about a healthy animal and a healthy animal being presented. And very often we forget that even in the case of an animal for even just dirty or is creating quite a severe risk for us at the abattoir in converting that animal. I don't have to remind you about listeriosis, where this was a particular issue. But the other aspect that is very often ignored when you talk about food safety is stress factors in the handling of the animal on the farm in preparing to transport to animal to the abattoir, and during transport, and even in handling at the abattoir. As you all know, that with stress, with high stress levels, we do not have enough lactic acid. We have a high pH of a product. And although that high pH of meat does not at that stage directly relate to a food safety issue, we know that the ability for that product to last is not as good as an animal well cared for. So it's a very important aspect to keep in mind, is that we are dependent again on the producer to provide us with that animal. If we talk about sampling and talk about residues, I just want to share a couple of thoughts on the residue side, and that is that it is the producer and the abattoir's responsibility then to make sure that the products, the animals, the carcasses, the meat that we present is free of residues. And this aspect is already included also in the correct use of the Declaration of Health that I will just refer to in the next slide for you. Right. Here you see just a summary of Dr. Molefe's program from the department side in terms of residues and the work that's being done just from the department side in a surveillance program to provide assurances as far as residue monitoring is concerned. You see a total of 2,500 samples that the department responsible for over the last year only, to make sure that we can provide some assurances to our local and also to our international clients with regard to residue monitoring. But I can also add to this by saying to you that in the last 2 years, we also have an additional feedlot program that has provided approximately 3,000 samples in addition to this to look for residues in our programs. It's interesting that the non-conformances are pretty similar in these two programs, but what we are requesting clients where positive samples are being identified is to provide us with full non-conformance reports on these issues. Keep in mind, this is a result that's available from 2 weeks to 2 months afterwards. But that doesn't prevent a producer or a feedlot to have a look at that batch of animals. Again, Pieter referred to traceability. We cannot operate without a proper traceability program. In the case of feedlots, we can pinpoint that specific batch. We can look at the specific records for that batch of animals, and we can still correct operational problems at our feedlot and our producers to solve these problems. I'm going to try the next slide. Now, the Declaration of Health is another way of sharing the responsibility of a safe product. This came into effect in our 2004 regulations, where we basically are saying that we cannot expect of a meat inspector at a facility to do an inspection, ante-mortem and post-mortem inspection, and come to a conclusion without some assistance from the producer. So this is what we're expecting a producer to do, to provide us with full details of the date of delivery, where does it come from, the number of species, the health status, including the mortality rate on that farm, any medication given, as well as the withdrawal periods and dates of these products. So we are reliant on that information to be able to assure a safe product to our consumer. Do not expect a meat inspector in isolation to be able to provide those assurances. We have the next slide. Yep, I'm sharing this with you again just to illustrate the intricacy of our, in this case, meat safety monitoring system. And you'll see this divide between the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health, where the moment a product leaves then the abattoir, then that responsibility for food safety becomes that of the Department of Health. And yeah, I'm glad to say that there are occasions where there is some interaction, good work between the departments, but yeah, at best, this is not the best scenario for a food safety or a meat safety system. Next slide, please. To remind you that we did implement the meat inspection scheme in 2018 already. The reason for that scheme that was introduced by the department was to make sure that the meat inspection agencies that was currently providing this service, that they are registered with the national department. And so it's a national responsibility to make sure that there's recognition for the companies that appoint these inspectors, and not a matter of only the person being registered at each abattoir by the province. So there's now a national responsibility for meat inspection under the supervision of a veterinarian, which again is a step forward, you know, in providing food safety assurances. And yep, that is then indeed, you know, this is an integrated approach. We simply cannot try, you know, as individual organizations or as industry without government, and I believe as government without industry, we cannot make it work. This is a responsibility along the entire value chain with the assistance of the department.
Thank you very much, Gerhard.
Thank you.
Just a couple of things. The residue monitoring, won't you just kind of like spell that out a bit? I think, again, just, you know, this information is going to be shared on Facebook. What do you mean by residue monitoring for the sake of the average South African?
Well, obviously, in the normal operation on a farm and a feedlot, various products are being used to either treat disease or to prevent disease. And these products have different withdrawal periods. So just even within the same antibiotic range, let's talk about the simple example of using an antibiotic on an animal for pneumonia. Some of these products have a withdrawal period. You may not use it according to the registration of the product. You may not use it within 3 days after use of this product for human consumption. Sometimes milk up to 28 days, and we have some antibiotics that is, you know, you have a withdrawal period of up to 28 days. So there's a requirement, and that applies to your corticosteroids, beta antagonist, and all the different products. So for each of these products, the farmer must have a very specific program to ensure that he did follow this withdrawal period. And for that, he needs records on his farm. So what we are simply doing then with our residue monitoring program is to make sure that these prescriptions in terms of how to use a product is not abused by the farmer and or the feedlot as it may be.
Gerhard, the second question relates to the meat inspection program. So again, just for the average South African, what you're saying about the meat inspection program is that the company, as well as the person that provides the meat inspection, so this is now once the animal has been slaughtered, that company and that individual are independent of the abattoir. In other words, they're not employed by the abattoir, so that we could be cooking the books, so to speak.
That's right. The requirement is that there are now certain companies that meet minimum requirements, that they are all appointed by the department, by the national department, and this company cannot choose one of these agencies to appoint. You also have the choice then you need the permission of the department also to change from service provider, from the one service provider. So yes, this service provider is appointed and working independently in terms of the scheme, and this service provider also have an open door to the department. In fact, the scheme provides for the fact that this service provider must actually on a monthly basis also report to the department on any non-conformances relating to, and this is important, it's not only relating to meat inspection, but also relating to regulatory non-compliance. So if there are any regulations that are being transgressed, it's the responsibility of the service provider to report this to the provincial department for follow-up actions.
Thanks, Gerhard. Now, my last question or comment rather is that all of these controls that you've been talking about are for meat that is slaughtered within a registered abattoir. And I think the importance of knowing where your meat is coming from is paramount, because if you don't know where it's coming from, you can't rely on any of the controls that you or Mr. Molefe, Dr. Molefe or Dr. Vervoort have actually spoken about. Am I correct?
That's absolutely correct. I think we have a tendency in South Africa just to assume that when we buy meat or get meat, that it is actually from a registered abattoir, which is not always the case. And yes, it's a question that the consumer must certainly always ask. Does this come from a registered abattoir, to be able to receive the assurances, that the abattoir will give the consumer?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gerhard. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for telling us about the processes that are involved with taking the cow to the carcass. Now we're going to a slightly different part of the cow, and I'm going to ask Dr. Van Dijk to please join us as we talk about the Milk Producers Organization, and how we control the milk processing. Over to you, Dr. Van Dijk.
Linda, thank you for the invitation. It's indeed a privilege to be here today. And what I would like to, to discuss is more the role of the primary producer, and then, more specifically the primary dairy producer. I think it's a very, very important role player, to ensure that we actually do get healthy food and healthy dairy products on our desks every day. Now, what I would like to discuss today, first of all, I would like to take a quick glance at the South African dairy industry. And then I would like to mention some of the risks that we do have, under that, more specifically, then to pay attention to food safety and also to the public health. And then, as was referred also by previous speakers, I would like to look at some of the risk mitigations that we do from farm to fridge. That's very, very important to look at that also. Now, if you look at the South African dairy industry, although we are very small role player, if you look at the total, the world production, we only produce about 0.6% of the total milk that's produced in the world on a daily basis. We've got about 286 dairy farmers or dairy parlours in the country, and then milking about 600,000 dairy cows every day. Now that milk is, those 600,000 dairy cows are actually producing about 3.3 billion litres of milk, every year, with a total revenue or a total turnover then of 14.6 billion rand. Now, I think it's important, if you look on the right-hand side there, the right-hand slide there, I would like to call it a dichotomy between, a very, very advanced dairy industry, and advanced, although, as I said in the beginning, we're very small, but we're one of the most advanced dairy industries in the world. And, it's a highly technological environment. And then on the other side, we've got the emerging farmers, subsistence dairy farmers, and the guys that's milking 1 or 2 cows on a daily basis. And that's also what we do, as we sustainable dairy farming for everyone. That's basically our vision at the MPO, at the Milk Producers Organization, addressing the needs and the needs and the wants from the guy that's milking 1 or 2 cows by hand, and then also up to the bigger dairy farmers that's milking up to 10,000 dairy cows per day. Just on this triangle, you can see it a little bit better, and I would like to, mention it here and then maybe get back to it later on again. Because on the commercial side, as I said, about 1,200 dairy farmers of that, about 20% of that 1,200 will be producing about 80% of the milk, the dairy that we consume per day. We've also got a project running in Kwakwa in the Free State under the auspices of Milk South Africa, where we're actually supporting 16 emerging dairy farmers, you know, to go to the next level. But as I said, you know, the darker blue and the very dark blue at the bottom, the subsistence farmers, that's also where we need to look at, and specifically when you look at food security, important there, you know, to supply the product there, but also then to look at food safety, and then also, you know, the different things that we need to make sure that it's a sustainable environment, and that we produce a sustainable and a very good and a very high quality product. So I think it's important, you know, just to keep this in mind. But as I said, you know, there's different risks that we do have in the dairy sector. Some of that, you know, I'm not going to discuss everything here, but I think I would like to highlight, you know, the dairy industry is a very volatile environment. You know, there's ups and downs there. Then it's, you know, the milk price. Then it's, as an example, weather can play a role. And all of that is actually contributing, you know, to make this a very, very volatile industry. And not many people will survive in this type of industry. You know, there's a lot of business risks also associated, but I think the more important ones lower down: animal health, animal welfare, very, very important to look at that. But then more specifically, food safety, and then also public health. Now, if you look at food safety, you know, if I can highlight that I think it's important, you know, that everything that we do on the food safety side is done under Act 54 of 1974, the Foodstuff, Cosmetics and Disinfectant Act. And that's, you know, where everybody, you know, there we look at the public health, including the food safety, and then also the standards. And there's, as you know, Dairy Standard Agency under the management of Jompie Burger is doing a very, very good job here, you know, to make sure that we get a high quality, high level of food actually on the shelf. You know, every time when you go into a shop and you buy a dairy product there, you can be 100% sure, you know, it's a high quality product. There's no inhibitory substances, you know, it's a correct formulation. Effective processing has been followed, and very important, you know, that the product has been pasteurized. I think it's very important, you know, if you look at dairy products, you know, that it should be pasteurized. One, you know, is just, I think it's irresponsible to actually to buy and to actually to consume raw dairy products or unprocessed dairy products. And then also the prevention of the recontamination of the product, and then eventually, you know, the maintenance. This is unfortunately a product, you know, most of the products must be kept under quality, you know, in a so-called cold chain, and the maintenance of the temperature control during the distribution, the retail sale, and then also the storage of the product in the home. This is very, very important to make sure that you actually do get a product that's produced under high qualities, processed under high qualities, that you actually then can still enjoy it at home. Now, if you look at public health, I think the public health and the important part on this slide is zoonosis. Zoonosis is basically, you know, that's diseases that can be transmitted from animals to humans, and also vice versa. You know, humans can also transmit diseases to animals, and that's the type of disease specifically more in the veterinary science, but then also, you know, in animal health and so on, that we need to look at. I've highlighted some of the diseases, the possibility that it can be transmitted by milk. Some of the zoonosis I've highlighted in red at the bottom. And you can see there's an example, you know, brucellosis, it's a bacterial disease caused by Brucella abortus, E. coli, Escherichia coli, leptospirosis, salmonellosis, and tuberculosis. Some of the diseases that can actually be transmitted by milk. And that's, you know, the main reason, and one of, or not the main reason, but one of the reasons why we actually do pasteurize milk. So we will get back to these organisms a little bit later again. But if you look at the South African dairy farmers, you know, as I said in the beginning, a relatively small role player, but very, very high. You know, it's a very, very scientific industry. I will show you one or two of the research projects that we're busy running, you know, just to make sure that we do actually produce a high quality product. So yes, South African dairy producers, and on the right hand side, very proud signage that we do have. And I think it's important, you know, that we do buy South African dairy products. You know, that's available, and one can actually check it on the label and make sure that you do get, you know, that is on the label there. You can be 100% sure it's a high quality product that's produced in our country. Now, over time, the South African dairy industry has actually developed very stringent quality management systems, and that's all underpinned by different comprehensive regulatory requirements. I think earlier Dr. Molefe actually alluded to all the different rules and the regulations and the acts that we do have. I'm not going to repeat it here, but it's only important for us, you know, to look at the customer needs. We need to look at the food safety, and then very, very important also the product traceability. And that's all paramount, you know, for the quality systems. And there again, you know, to get back to the important thing, animal welfare. Happy animal can produce a high quality product, and that's what we do. Also, you know, we make sure that animals, you know, that welfare is run up to the letter, you know, and then also by security. And then in this total process, we need to look at the environment also. You know, under our whole sustainability program at the MPO, we look at productivity, the 3 Ps of sustainability, profitability, and then the people of dairy, everything that we do there that I'm not going to discuss today. And then very important also the planet or the environmental sustainability, also very important to us. So yeah, the industry then works collaboratively with government. It's important, you know, most of these organisms that I referred to earlier, several of those diseases are actually managed under the Act, the different acts, you know, under the Department of Farming and Fisheries, the old DAF, or these days called DALRRD, D-A-R-L-L-D. You know, so that's all, you know, to ensure a preventative approach to food safety across the integrated supply chain. Now, if you look at the integrated supply chain, you know, some of the other role players, and I'm not going to discuss this slide in detail, but you can see on the left top there, the functional structure of Milk South Africa. Now, Milk South Africa do receive statutory money. Under the Marketing Act, we received money there, and there's different projects. You can see it in the peach-colored blocks there. The third one from the left, very important, dairy quality and safety. So there's a lot of research ongoing there. Also, we also on the right-hand side, there's a diagram of the IDF, the International Dairy Federation. The head office, they're based in Belgium, but you can see the one little block there, dairy safety and quality. Again, you know, there's a lot of projects going on there. So it's very, very important for us to make sure that this very high quality and very nutritious product that is presented to people, you know, without any remnants or inhibitory substances or anything that can actually affect the health of the people out there. So yeah, as I said, you know, we're busy with under Milk SA and managed by the NPO. We're busy with different dairy research and development programs. This is just some of the programs that we're doing under food safety. You can see from the top there, you know, biofilms, antimicrobial residues, anti-helminthic residues, the evaluation of antibiotic susceptibility testing methods. So we can go on. You know, we've also done a survey, you know, actually prior to that listeria scare that we had in the meat earlier, a year, 2 years ago. We've done a survey there, and we did listeria is all over. You know, it's produced. It's a ubiquitous organism. It's found all over the place. But I can actually assure people out there, you know, it's not. We've never found it actually in pasteurized milk. So yes, we haven't got listeria in our milk. Then if you go to the next slide on training, and again, I'm not going to. This is some of the training that we do from the Institute of Dairy Technology as one of the divisions of the NPO. And you can see there, you know, it's all Agri-CETA accredited training programs, all 13 of them, but you can see number 6 on milk harvesting, in-parlour processing, and that's what we do. We do it, you know, for subsistence farmers, we do it for communal farmers, for smallholders, and then also, you know, for the commercial dairy farming. Number 8, very important, the code of practice for milk producers, and also recently developed one on biosecurity management. All very important, you know, to actually to train the people and to teach them to eventually, you know, to ensure that we do have a high quality product on the shelf. Now, as I said, we look at risk and risk mitigation. At the bottom, this is what I'm going to follow. The sequence, from pre-farm. So these things, it doesn't start on the farm. It actually starts pre-farm. Pre-farming, some farms do need to actually to buy in their feed. They need to buy in their concentrates and so on. And all those things do run through a very, very intensive project, or where they actually evaluate that, where they make sure that there's no inhibitory substances or anything that can actually have an effect on the quality of the milk. Livestock itself, fertilizers, the water, and then also the chemicals. And I will get back to the chemicals and more specific to the pharmaceuticals also later. As I said, and as Dr. Molefe said, there's various acts and regulations. And that's all happening pre-farm. So that's very, it's important to actually realize, there's a whole value chain. It's not just a product that you're going to buy on the shelf that you're going to think this, where's this coming from and what is actually in the milk. Okay, on the farm itself, I think, there's a lot of risks that we need to manage. And, I can also report that our dairy farmers, all 1,200 of them, are actually manage this at a very, very high level. They're looking at farm inputs, as I said, to feed, veterinary chemicals and so on. But then also, the 1,200 dairy farmers, very, very good managers of their herds, the husbandry, strategic and effective immunization programs, and then also milking and the milking process. Very important to look at that and to continuously, to train and to retrain and to upskill the people there. That's doing the job there every day, 365 days of the year. Facilities also important, and then also the training of skills and the skills and knowledge of the farm staff. And that's something that we're doing from the MPO side, to upskill the people to take them to the next level. I think it's important on the right-hand side, maybe just one or two things there. Dr. Vervoort did refer to the livestock identification and traceability system. We've got things in place in the dairy industry. An animal can be, all animals are numbered. They're all identified on a computer. So we know exactly, from the day that animal is born up to eventually when that animal is culled, we know exactly what's happening to that animal, and all records are kept on that database on a computer at farm level, and that's available if people would like to have a look at that. Vendor declarations is also required, when animals and stock feed is purchased, and especially when it's coming from external sources. On the right-hand side, I've got it's a little comic there, but you can see there using antibiotics on the farm is a privilege and not a right. And I think our farmers do realize that. We've got a project that we ran last year, on specifically on antibiotics and the use of antibiotics. They all governed under Act 36 of 1947 and then Act 101 of 1965. That's the over-the-counter products that you can buy from the co-op, and then the products that you can get directly from a veterinarian. And very important, there that label instructions should be followed. Very, very important withholding periods for milk. I think Dr. Vervoort also did mention it, or Dr. Gerhard Neethling did mention it. The injection, the withdrawal periods for certain antibiotics or for all antibiotics has been predetermined, and the farmers do adhere to that. And yeah, we do have a testing scheme. Every time when milk is collected at the dairy farm, a small sample will be taken from that tanker, and it will be evaluated when it arrives at the processor. At the processor, it will be evaluated for bacterial count. It will be evaluated for E. coli. They will make 100% sure there's no water added to the milk. And then also, we also need to look at the somatic cell count, but then also, to look at any inhibitory substances. We specifically test at this stage, we test for the beta-lactams or your penicillins. We test for your tetracyclines and then also for your sulfamethazines. But there's also, some other products that we're busy testing. And at this stage, we couldn't find any, any other antibiotics or things in milk that should not be there. And that should all be documented, to make sure that we do get a good quality product in the end. Okay, if you look at transport itself, transport, the milk transport operators, you can't just go and buy a truck and start transporting milk. They should, it's all run under approved food safety program. and they all licensed, at the food authorities. Because the important thing there, the milk is collected at below 4 degrees Celsius at the farm, and it must go to the processor, as quickly as possible, and it must go in cooling trucks like we've got in the photo there, and be transported then to the to the processor to eventually to minimize then the potential for any food safety risks. Then it arrives at the processor, and at the processor then we do get the whole process then will start. One must also realize, pathogens like E. coli, Campylobacter, and Salmonella, as an example, can contaminate milk during the milking process. We in the environment, animals are there. There's feces, there's mud, there's water. One would like to prevent it as far as possible, but sometimes, unfortunately, it can happen that some of those organisms can enter into the milk. And that's where pasteurization then, at either normal pasteurization at 70 degrees, 72 degrees Celsius, or then, under the UHT or the ultra high temperature process, or then also at the extended shelf life process, so that is the product that you will buy from the normal retail. And I can most definitely say that those products are, that's healthy, and you can, be sure the product that you're going to drink is safe and that it won't be a problem. I think that the consumption, what I've got there in red there, the consumption of milk that is not pasteurized increases the risk of contracting disease from a food stuff that's otherwise very nutritious and very healthy. And then the food stuff I'm referring to there is milk. So, in my opinion, unprocessed or unpasteurized milk should not be consumed. If you look at the distribution, the second last or third last slide here, if you look at distribution, I think the middle part there is already alluded to, there's such a lot of information that we do collect at the different points, pre-farm at the manufacturer of the feeds and so on, then on the farm itself. So we actually, everybody is talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but we're already there. We must just do that and get this whole blockchain, the blockchain thing running. It's not driven by the technological industry. I think it's more driven by the consumer's desire to know more about the food. And this is part of the traceability that we're also running under the Animal Health Forum. This is a project, that we're going to run so that when you go into a retail shop and you buy a product there, you know exactly where that product is coming from. And then you will actually know what's happening on that farm, whether it's biosecurity or welfare or whatever is happening on that farm. You can actually trace it back there. So that's something that we, in the NPO and then also Milk SA and the different projects that we're running. These are some of the projects. It's very in the infant stage, but I think it will be in the next year or three. That will be something that consumer will be able to buy a product on the shelf, and you would be able to trace it back to where it's actually coming from. Okay, then the last one is the manufacturers. I think I've already said it, and it was earlier said in the presentation from Dr. Molefe. The different departments, Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Land Reform and Rural Development, the old DAF, all playing a very, very important role in interpreting and also negotiating the regulatory framework, not formwork, the regulatory framework. So it's important for us, eventually if that product, to ensure a safe and a consistent high quality product on the shelf. We need to be 100% sure that there's a very good public-private partnership, and that's what we, as an example, what we're busy doing under the Animal Health Forum, but also with the different organizations, the producers organizations like the NPO, and then also SAMPRO at the secondary level. Now on the last slide, as I said, we are sustainable dairy farming for everyone. That's basically our vision and part of our mission also, what we're busy doing on a daily basis. You can see on the left-hand side there, point number one there, safe and high quality products, healthy and comfortable animals and high quality of life for people on the farm. And then also if you look at the productivity or the economic side of it, cost efficient, environmentally sustainable dairy farm practices. So my very last slide here is, I think South Africa, the supply of our milk, based on the existing standards, I think I'm comfortable to say it's a very, very high quality product. And as a result of the high quality and the way that we produce this product, that we call milk, the risk to the general public from milk-borne zoonotic agents, I would say, is effectively eliminated. So that's, in a very few slides. It's one can take much longer on some of these things, but I think it's important, to share this with the general public out there, and that they can be 100% sure, the product that they do buy on the shelf is a high quality product, and they can drink it, with any hesitation.
Wow, Chris, I had no idea about all the things that go in to make sure that that milk that I put in my tea is as safe as what you have explained. So thank you very much for a very, very comprehensive presentation. I think that the dairy industry is definitely one of the most organized when it comes to food safety and food milk supply, and that as South Africans should be very comforting for us to know. And thank you very much for also mentioning your opinion regarding unpasteurized milk. It's definitely an area that I am personally very concerned about, and so I'm glad that you agree with me that it's not in your best interest from a health perspective to drink unpasteurized milk. I love the South African cow. The South African cow is so cute. That's an amazing logo in terms of sustainable dairy farming, and we hope to see it all over the place as you guys continue with those initiatives to increase sustainable dairy farming. Thank you very much for your presentation. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we've spent a lot of time so far talking about all things that have more than two legs, and all the animal side of the agricultural sector. And now we're going to change our attention, and we're going to look at all things green. And so I have a very special guest here who's joining us from Melbourne, Australia. And Deon is the head of food safety at PMA, and he's responsible for Australia and the New Zealand region. He's going to tell us a little bit about what PMA is all about, what they do in relation to agriculture and produce specifically. And then he's going to be talking to us a bit about some of the specific food safety issues. He's previously worked for the WHO and the FAO. He's also worked for Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, and worked in the dairy sector as a regulator. He's worked in 25 countries. You must have a thick passport, Deon. And he's got a wide range, published quite a bit on a whole lot of technical aspects. And I see he also has that big L word in his CV, Listeria monocytogeny. So I'm sure that he's got some great things to tell us about lettuce and whatnot. So Deon, I'm handing control over to you. You are now in control of the mouse. Hopefully we won't have too much of a lag. All yours.
Thank you very much, Linda. A pleasure to be here. Good afternoon. I want to talk about growing it safe from the perspective of horticulture and fresh produce, but I would firstly like to I thought I would just give a little bit of context, and Linda did lead in by talking about the 2018 UN resolution which adopted World Food Safety Day, and it's really interesting, if we can move to the next slide, to look at the content of that resolution, because it stresses the things that we really want to focus on when it comes to World Food Safety Day. That is food security. We cannot have food security without food safety. And that's particularly important in countries such as South Africa, countries in the developing world as well. Food security is a really critical issue, and you cannot have it without food safety. That food safety also contributes to trade, employment and poverty alleviation. There is a global burden of foodborne illnesses, and as you said at the outset, somewhere around 1 in 10 people in my country, Australia, it's between 1 in 4 and 1 in 6 people suffer an episode of foodborne illness every year. So that's a significant burden on a country, on its medical system. And it's also important for us to just raise awareness at all levels about promoting actions for global food safety. It impacts our domestic populations. It impacts our export markets if we don't get it right. If I move to the next slide, as my intro said, I've worked for the World Health Organization and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations for a period of since the early 1990s, undertaking a range of assignments and consultations and being involved in expert panels. One of the things I wanted to stress here was that the global strategy for food safety, which I authored back in 2001, was a result of a resolution from the World Health Assembly in 2000 that food safety was a major public health issue. So it was the first time that the Assembly, which was dealing with things from HIV, tuberculosis, public health issues, recognised food safety as a significant public health issue. There's been a lot of activity ever since by both those UN agencies, World Health and FAO, in working to ensure food safety. You might notice the picture in the bottom right-hand corner. I was brought in by WHO to go and undertake work with the South African government and led the team that went to Polokwane that isolated the outbreak strain from the premises there. So these are important bits of work that those two agencies do, and it's great that they recognise food safety through the designation of a designated day for World Food Safety. If we can move to the next slide, I'll give you some context to the organisation I work for, which is the Produce Marketing Association. It's a global entity. It is based in the United States, and we have agencies in Australia that look after Australia and New Zealand, and we have an agency in South Africa. It's a member-based organisation, so we have members in South Africa. There are 103 members of PMA. They're buyers, they're sellers, they're everyone through the entire supply chain for fresh produce, horticulture products. And one of the challenges for us is to provide guidance about assuring the safety and the suitability of horticulture products, fresh produce for consumers globally. And I think it's important to stress here, we've talked about animals, we've talked about meat safety, we've talked about dairy safety. Horticulture is increasingly being seen as a significant cause of foodborne illness. When I studied microbiology, we were focused on meat, we were focused on seafood, we were focused on dairy products. And we've had histories of problems such as salmonella with milk powder in the 1970s. We had problems with listeria in the processed meat sector for many years. Largely those problems have been addressed, but we have increasing numbers of foodborne illness associated with horticulture products, be it lettuce, be it spinach leaves, be it cantaloupes or rock melons. These types of products are increasingly causing a burden of foodborne illness on people globally. And horticulture is a significant, no, if we just go back, horticulture is a significant industry in South Africa. It's a significant, that's okay. It's significant in terms of its annual gross value of production, which exceeds some 78 billion rand in figures from 2017, 2018, and accounts for a significant amount of employment in agriculture. But there are a wide range of products and they're having different risk profiles. So if we take a root crop such as a carrot or a potato, the risks associated with those, the food safety risks of those types of products is incredibly small compared to, say, a rock melon or a strawberry or a berry or a fresh leafy green, because they have much different profiles. And one of the challenges are that these products don't have any kill step associated with them. We don't cook them, we don't treat them in a way that would remove pathogens. So if we go to the next slide, food safety, the critical ingredient. There's lots of things here that we need to focus on. We've got changing trends about the way we eat and how we eat. And there is a significant trend towards fresh produce, particularly because, and in these times of COVID-19, we're stressing to people the need for a healthy diet. We encourage people to eat nutritionally, and horticulture products provide a whole range of different benefits from a public health perspective, from a nutrition perspective, I should stress. And that's why we encourage people to eat these products. But there is also the risk, the increased risk of foodborne illness. Why? If we click on the next slide, we've got problems unlike the meat industry and the dairy industry, we don't have strong regulatory base. We don't have a strong historical base in terms of managing these products because they weren't seen to be such a high risk in the past. Increasingly, we know that's the case, and now we're focusing on things such as inputs on the agricultural side. Water quality is really critical. The use of manure and fertilizers, proximities to animals and feedlots are all things which impact on our horticulture, on our fresh produce. Contaminated water, particularly, it's okay if you've got a root crop and you're watering at ground level, but if you're spraying contaminated water on a leaf crop, such as a lettuce, on a spinach product, you've got significant risks there for the consumer. We've got longer supply chains, and cold chain integrity becomes a real issue there for some of the pathogens that we're concerned about. There's no kill step for leafy greens. We're not going to give a cooking or a retorting or some sort of process on a leafy green. Fresh fruit, it's very difficult to clearly wash something like a strawberry or a rock melon. And we've got a lot of minimally processed products, a lot of pre-prepared salads. Again, there is great need for control over both the raw material and all of the steps in the processing chain, the cold chain. The other thing to take note of is in most countries, we've got increasing numbers of what we call yuppies, people that are very young, very old, are pregnant or immunocompromised. In my country, I estimate it's around 24% of the population of 25 million who could be classified in the yoppie group. And these people are vulnerable to things such as listeria, and more susceptible to infection. The types of hazards we encounter in fresh produce is not as significant. There's not as many as we find in say dairy products or in meat products, but the usual suspects. It's the salmonellas, it's the listerias, it's the enterohemorrhagic E. coli, Campylobacter. We also have a number of parasites which have been found to be transmitted by fresh produce, Cryptosporidium and Cyclospora. We're not going to dwell on it here, but there is also the issue of chemical residues and environmental contaminants which can impact on fresh produce. It's very difficult to get an idea of what the burden of illness is. I've not been able to identify any data from South Africa which gives us information about what the burden is, how many people are impacted by foodborne illness associated with fresh produce each year. But if we look at some of the costs associated with the outbreak of listeriosis in polony in 2017-18, this is some work that was recently published in the Journal of Food Control. Their loss of life, they estimated, was somewhere between 264 million and 524 million. That's associated with DALRRD's daily adjusted life years. The loss of product, some 4,000 tonnes of product, valued at 55 million. These are US dollar figures. And export bans, which impacted on the ability to trade meat products into adjacent and other African countries, was estimated to cost $11 million. So aside from the public health impact of foodborne illness, there are significant commercial impacts as well. So the next steps, the horticulture industry is really now starting to take greater interest in managing food safety because it's come to the fore. In Australia, we're just starting to look preliminary looks at introducing food standards for high-risk horticulture. These are products that are deemed to be higher risk, such as melons, berries, and leafy greens. But there needs to be a stronger focus. We need a better educated and resourced people in the primary industry sector to understand the risks. They need to understand they're part of a food supply chain and that they need to address things such as inputs like water and manure and fertilizer, treated manures, treated fertilizers, or stabilized or composted products to avoid the risk of transmitting enteric pathogens, etc., that might be in the manure. There needs to be enhanced oversight and control over those farm inputs. We need to think also about the management of insects and pests because they do significantly impact the risk of contamination of these products. Some of the cases of contamination of EHEC in spinach in the United States were associated with wild boars that wandered through farm at night. something that was not envisaged to being a problem, but wild animals. There needs to be improvements in supply chain equipment and facilities to enable more effective sanitation of these products. Adherence to good hygienic practices, that's one of the areas that we're working on in Australia, along the entire food supply chain for fresh produce. Improvements in personal hygiene, improvements in hygienic practices. I think one of the spin-offs from what we're experiencing at the moment with COVID-19 is a greater emphasis on hand washing and hygiene. People are concerned not to become infected. The spin-off there is, the secondary impact is that we're going to have a safer food supply because workers in food premises are adhering to these practices much more rigorously in the past. And finally, there's another part of this, and that's consumer education. Consumers need to understand that there is no such thing as a totally safe food, that there is risks inherent in everything, and they need to understand about proper handling and preparation of fresh produce. Again, there was an issue here with COVID-19, which I spoke about recently, which was about the fact that there was some very erroneous advice telling people to wash fresh produce in detergents and sanitizers. Completely wrong. Washing them in washing them in fresh running water is as good as it gets. That is an effective way of sanitizing. Not 100% perfect, but certainly not using sanitizers and detergents which are not appropriate and not recommended for products that you're going to eat. PMA is here to assist industry in that journey, and it's great that just last week Leanne Jones was appointed as the new country manager for South Africa. So I'm not sure if Leanne was on the line earlier on, but she'll be your contact in South Africa. Pleasure to talk today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Deon. I was actually going to ask you the question about, so how do I wash that lettuce? Because I think it's a question on many people's lips. So if it's such a if it can make me sick, then how do I clean it properly? And the challenge always is, that you can't cook it, and there's not really a chemical that you can use at home. That is. So I'm glad that you mentioned that point.
One of the perceptions, and I think it's been highlighted more since with COVID-19, that in our supermarkets and in our shops, fruit and vegetables are there for people to touch and grab and sort through. Of course, we now look with aghast at someone if they're sorting through, touching avocados, and we think, oh, don't. Those products are not considered to be ready to eat. A very important definition in food safety is ready to eat, and that determines whether you have a listeria standard or a listeria absence of listeria. These products are meant to be taken home and washed. And now, I don't think that's particularly well understood, and consumer education becomes an important issue here, that these products you do need to wash avocados. Surveys in the United States have shown that 17% of avocados in the United States, both domestic and imported avocados, had Listeria monocytogenes on the surface. They didn't find it in guacamole, but they found it on the surface. So we should be washing them, and washing them in cold running water is perfectly acceptable. That's perfectly fine, as long as that water is potable water. And that's the best we can possibly do. It obviously helps if a fruit and vegetable can be peeled, because you've then got an outer layer and a protection. But look at rock. Do you call them rock melons or cantaloupes?
We actually call them something else. We call them spun speck.
Oh, spun speck. Okay.
Yeah.
If you, which I'm sure you haven't, but if you could ever look at a rock melon under an electron microscope, it looks like the Grand Canyon. There's an enormous number of nooks and crannies, and it's very difficult to wash and sanitize a rock melon. And we've had incidences in this country with salmonella and listeria associated with rock melon, and in the United States they've had listeria outbreaks. So just as you were having the problem with polony, we had problems with rock melons in Australia, and a different sequence type of listeria, but it was a significant problem in Australia. and it's changed the way now we handle rock melons and look at them. But there is a significant issue that if you're a vulnerable population, you should be well educated about the risks associated with rock melons.
Absolutely, yes. I think your selection, if I had to offer you sushi or spinach, which one are you going to go with?
Oh, I go for sushi. I love sushi, but I'm very cautious. I wouldn't eat it on a Sunday or a Monday because.
Oh, okay.
and I wouldn't. Prince Charles came to Australia and had raw fish in the centre in Alice Springs and got food poisoning. Alice Springs in Australia is thousands of miles from the coast, so you need to pick your place.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Deon. We really do appreciate your input. It's great to know that PMA is active in South Africa and is a resource for the South African produce industry, and we look forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And now if I ask the distinguished vets to join us for one last round of questions, I'm just going to ask Dr. Neethling if he can please unmute himself, because I'm not able to unmute from my side. He has muted himself. Please, Gerhard, if you can unmute yourself. Dr. Molefe, thank you so much for being with us today. We really do appreciate your chatting to us about the framework that you are responsible for. It is a very onerous task, and we do thank you very much for the efforts that you are responsible for on our behalf as citizens of South Africa. Any words of that you would like to share with us as consumers regarding the safety of meat products in South Africa and the role that we as consumers should play?
Thank you very much. As has been echoed by all presenters today, it's an approach that we should all take together. All the way from the farm until the table or stable or table or the fridge, as Dr. Van Dijk has said. So everybody has a role to play. We cannot only leave it up to the processing level to eliminate a hazard. A hazard should be eliminated right at the beginning, which is at the farm level, so that by the time this product enters the food chain, there is very little to worry about, and therefore, it can be declared safe. But even at the retail, even at home, everybody has to practice, hygienic measures, Right, these days we are talking a lot about washing of hands, and I think this has come in handy for us in food safety. If out of this COVID-19, people can come up with a message that is very critical to wash hands and wash tables and wash equipment, I think we would have achieved far more than just getting rid of the COVID-19. It will seriously help us in terms of ensuring that the food that we consume is safe, and then as a result there'll be very little burden on the health system at the end of the day to then take care of sick people. So it's a responsibility for all of us, and this therefore then talks to the collaboration of everybody. And I'm glad that Dr. Vervoort has talked to the mandate of the National Animal Health Forum, because that is one unit that we are very proud of. And the department is also participating on that forum, where you have producers, you have government sitting together on a table to ensuring that everybody puts in their contribution to the table, to ensure that at the end of the day we have products that are safe for human consumption. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Molefe. Dr. Vervoort, congratulations. Those were that was high commendation and praise from Dr. Molefe. Any last words from your perspective in terms of the role of the consumer and the importance of traceability?
Yeah, well, I don't really need to say anything after Dr. Molefe, but no, I think communication is very important. It's a long chain. The whole chain of getting animals or produce from the farm to the consumer's plate. And I think it's really, as Dr. Molefe said, everybody's job to be involved in this. And I think this is what we at the Animal Health Forum try and do. We try and foster communication between groups so that there's no breakdown somewhere along the way. Are we doing a good job in South Africa? Yes, I think we're doing a pretty good job. Can we do better? We can always do better, and we need to strive to be the best. If we want to trade on the world market, which I think we should be doing and we can be doing, we've got to be the best, and I think we can do that if we all work together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's good to be collaborating on that very issue with you today. Dr. Neethling, just some last words. You know, we've all been very focused on the pandemic. How has the pandemic impacted on the abattoir sector?
Well, yes, I think our colleague Broad already said, you know, that obviously there is already a lot of focus, and now even more so on this, on general hygiene. We are glad about that as far as the outbreak is concerned. Definitely a lot more awareness also in our facilities. I think that the only problem with our facilities is that the other requirements that we have, the social distancing aspects, the number of people being allowed, is putting a lot of strain on production. So it is challenging time for our industry, but you know, at the same time, we know that those measures are necessary just to simply prevent infections of personnel, and hopefully allowing us to stay open and to stay in business.
Absolutely, and just a word from Food Focus, just to say, hashtag thank you for our food. If you could please convey our thanks to the abattoir sector, because they've been continuing with business as usual since the very first day of lockdown. While we're all been hiding at home, they've been making sure that we've got chops on our table, and we really do appreciate that, and we would very much like you to share that thanks with them. To the speakers, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your very informative presentations. Thank you for putting the agricultural aspects of the food chain into a nutshell, so that we can all understand exactly where our food comes from and how it actually gets onto our tables, and the controls that are there to protect us as South Africans. So for all of you that have joined us today, thank you very much. Thank you to all the organizations that have been supporting the initiatives with the Department of Health this week. There are lots of other activities planned, so make sure you check out our website so that you know what else you can participate in. As I said to all the speakers, once again, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the World Food Safety Day celebrations. We'll chat to you soon.